Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, so our talk today actually is titled Habitudes. Habitudes. So this month, as we do every January, we're getting back to our Science of Mind basics. And we're digging into and defining some words and phrases that make sense when we speak religious science. But they may not make much sense when we speak only English. As I mentioned last week, there is actually a book called How to Speak Religious Science, and that was by Dr. Dennis Merritt Jones. And he wrote this because there are so many terms and phrases that have special and unique meaning to us. I know that when I first started studying this teaching, I was very confused by all of the names that were attributed to God and Spirit, and now it's just second nature, and there's so many other things that were confusing at first, but really made sense as I went along. So this month we've done our own How to Speak Religious Science by exploring and defining a number of such as the divine creative process, the law, false belief, affirmative life, demonstrations, the absolute, consciousness, spiritual truth, and we've added a new one, pronoia, and its related word, proanoid. That was a talk earlier on. So we talked about what would be the opposite of proanoid or pronoia.
Paranoid.
Paranoid. So it's the opposite of that. So today we will add another new word that I really think that Ernest Holmes might have just loved. And that word is, as I said, the title of my talk, Habitudes. For many years, Dr. Harry Morgan Moses, anybody familiar with him? You've heard him before. He was the president of the Affiliated New Thought Network, which is ANTN, and he has been a religious science minister as well for years, many years. And he often spoke at Asilomar, which used to be the location of the yearly religious science retreats. And I was fortunate enough to actually get to hear him speak many, many times. And, side note, I was honored that he was on my ordination panel. He was once giving a talk to ministers about public speaking, and he said that after you quote somebody 3 times and give the originator credit each one of those times, then the quote becomes your own and you don't have to give him credit anymore. Well, I have used the word habitude more than 3 times, so according to Dr. Harry's view, I don't have to say that I got it from anyone. But because I didn't make it up, I want to give credit to who coined that term, and it was, in fact, Dr. Harry. So Dr. Harry Moses is the one who Harry Morgan Moses, I should say. So I want to just thank him for introducing that term to me. So what is habitude? What is a habitude? A habitude is a habit of attitude. And your attitude about life is one element that combines to create your what?
Attitude.
Well, your habit of attitude. Your attitude about life is one element that combines to create your what? Your consciousness. Your consciousness. What is an attitude according to the dictionary? A feeling or way of thinking that affects your behavior. A feeling or way of thinking that affects your behavior. And in his book, Obvious Power, 25 Habitudes That Shift Your Thoughts into Action, Dr. Harry writes, a major aspect of creating habitudes is being able to think in new ways about subjects which are familiar to us. A good habitude causes the spontaneous first reaction of our mind to move us in the direction of our fulfillment. If we can layer our habitudes in such a way that our responding and acting in a forward, life-giving manner becomes as natural as breathing, we will have gained mastery over our lives. But the fact is that we all get hooked in habitual ways of seeing and responding to the world. And often those habitual ways of seeing and responding to the world do not bring us peace or freedom or joy, or love, or harmony, or health, or abundance, and all those other human experiences that combine to create a fulfilled life, do they? In fact, they move us in the opposite direction of those qualities of life, right? Yes?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Ernest Holmes puts it very succinctly when he wrote in The Science of Mind. We might well remember always that unless we control thought, it will control us. Unless we control thought, it will control us. I love this straightforward statement from E Squared by Pam Grout. Who's familiar with Pam Grout? It's actually a very fun book to read if you have not read E Squared and E Cubed. E Squared, I think, is her best, though, because it just really gets the juices flowing, and there's experiments to do every day so you can see immediate results. It's a lot of fun. And she writes, most of us are still operating out of the mental architecture of our ancestors. In other words, we have ancestral habitudes. We think we're running our lives with our brilliant ideas and thoughts. We think we're affirming our intentions and creating new possibilities. But in reality, we're simply recycling old tapes, knee-jerk conditioning, and automatic behaviors, most of which we picked up before we were 5. Wow. This morning we're going to apply a 3-step practice guaranteed to create new habitudes, to create a new normal if you work the steps. As New Thought leader Johnny Coleman, she was the founder and minister of the Christ Universal Temple in Chicago, once said, with more than just a little attitude, but a different definition of attitude, this stuff works if you work it. This stuff works if you work it. So these practices work if you work them. So here's the deal. They are not rocket science. They're pretty simple and straightforward. And you've heard me say them before. They are not deep esoteric teachings, but if applied, they can make all the difference in your life. And if not applied, they can, well, make a big difference as well, and may just not be the difference that you might want. So let's explore practice number 1. The first practice is noticing when you get hooked, meaning caught in a habitual pattern which causes you to suffer. Notice that when you get hooked, you often speak and act in ways which only serve to strengthen your habits of resentment, anger, of blaming others, and so forth, which then just entrenches you in patterns that make you more and more unhappy. One of my hooks is when I'm driving. You will agree with that. And someone doesn't signal or cuts in front of me or is going 20 miles in a 50 mile, those I get hooked in. It's one of my challenges, I will admit to that. The fact is that with some practice you can catch on to this rather quickly and begin to clearly notice when you are hooked. This is called many things by different leaders. Being the observer, developing the compassionate witness, that was a phrase by Dr. Wayne Dyer. Noticing what you are noticing. Taking that witness view. What am I noticing today? Standing guard at the portals of your mind. I say it's simply being awake versus being on autopilot. I know I've often been driving and ended up somewhere and thought, I don't remember driving here. How did I get here? Because my mind was somewhere else. And you can work it backwards. If you aren't really awake, if you are not standing guard at the portal of your mind, not being the observer and not noticing what you are noticing, but if you find yourself suffering, then backtrack and take a look at what your attitude is. And then ask, is this attitude habitual? There's a good chance that it will be. So noticing is critical, but not the end. Wait, there's more. Practice number 2. Ben Franklin spoke to practice number 2 when he said, who's strong? He who can conquer bad habits. Wow, wisdom. The second practice then is to do something different. This practice is a bit more difficult to catch on because it goes against the grain of our current habitudes. A habit, by definition, is something that we do over and over and over, and it becomes automatic. But we can change habits. Who here has quit smoking? Okay, see, there. It can be done. It can be done. And as we choose a fresh alternative, we begin to create a new habitude. Charles Fillmore, founder of Unity, in his book, Atom Smashing Power of Mind, wrote, your mind, body, and affairs are the expression of your thoughts. So if you are not happy, change your mental habits. This may not seem practical to you at first, but if you faithfully practice, you will witness practical results. You can cultivate the habit of seeing the good, the true, the bright side of every subject. And Holmes, of course, said, change your thinking, change your life. Sounds so simple. Here's a story of a woman who was working on changing her habitudes. She had had an altercation with her husband and had a typical habitual reaction to something he said to her, and she got angry and defensive. But she noticed what had happened, and she realized she needed to do something to change her mood, to find a fresh alternative, so she would come back to him and have a different conversation. Then she realized that choir practice at her church was starting soon, and she loved singing in her choir. So she left with her teenage son, who also liked to sing in the choir, and they jumped in the car and headed off. That particular practice was exhilarating, and she left feeling very heavenly. She even stopped in the church bookstore to browse, and she saw a "Honk If You Love Jesus" sticker. And it was on a bumper sticker, and here now are her words. So I bought the bumper sticker, and I immediately put it on the back of my car, and I'm really glad I did. What an uplifting experience that followed. I was stopped at a light in a busy intersection, just lost in my heavenly thoughts and feelings and how I was going to make amends to my husband when I got home, and I didn't notice that the light had turned green when suddenly I found lots of people who loved Jesus. Why, the boy behind me started to honk like crazy. He must really love Jesus, because pretty soon he leaned out of his car and said, "Go, Jesus, go!" Everyone else was honking, and they were honking too, so I leaned out of my window and waved and smiled at all of those loving people. There must have been a guy from Florida back there, because I could hear him yelling something about a sunny beach. And I saw him waving in a funny way with only one finger, and I asked my teenage son in the back seat what that meant. He was so caught up in the joy of the moment that he could hardly catch his breath from laughing, but finally told me that it was the Hawaiian good luck sign. So I leaned out of the window and I gave him the good luck sign right back. A couple of people were so caught up in the joy of this joyous moment that they got out of their cars and were walking towards me. I just knew they wanted to celebrate with me, but then I noticed that the light had changed again, so I stepped on the gas, and it's a good thing I did, because I was the only car to get across the intersection. I looked back at all my new friends standing there and leaned out the window and gave them a big smile and held up the Hawaiian good luck sign one more time as I drove away. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I mean, because that is one of my areas as drivers that are not paying attention, and I need a new habitude about. But it's a pretty good example of changing your attitude, right? To bring that back to our quote, you can cultivate the habit of seeing the good, the true, and bright side of every subject. Every subject. And that takes us to practice number 3. I promise, no more bad jokes. The third and final practice is making this exploration a way of life, not just something you do once in a while, a way of life. The notion here is that this is not just a one-time thing where you noticed your hook, choose a fresh alternative, and then it's all over. Done. Took care of that. These patterns are something that will continue to arise in our experience. I cannot tell you how many times I have conquered them only to find I'm hooked again. It's a continual practice. And it leaves us with dozens or hundreds of opportunities each week to notice the ways that we get caught in the momentum of our habitual responses to life's challenges. That's why taking spiritual classes, workshops, book studies, coming to services, practicing this, reading every day, affirmations, that's why it's so valuable and why we regard it so highly. Here's a habitude I'm wanting to instill this morning. God meant it for good. God meant it for good. From Genesis, the classic example of this is the biblical narrative of Joseph, the youngest and favorite son of Jacob, for whom his father made a coat of many colors. He was mistreated and betrayed and eventually sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Eventually, after a great deal of hardship, he became the second highest ruler in Egypt, right next to Pharaoh. Joseph had dreams of prophecy and dreamed of a famine coming. Convinced the Pharaoh that this was true, and they stored grain for years in preparation for it. When the famine hit, people from everywhere, including his brothers, came to get grain. By way of forgiving his brothers, he said to them, "You may have intended evil against me, but God meant it for good." God meant it for good. Charles Fillmore, in Talks on Truth, wrote, "Pronounce every experience good and of God, and by that mental attitude you will call forth only the good. What seemed error will disappear, and only the good will remain. This is the law, and no one can break it. The adversary always flees before the mind that is fixed on the pure, the just, and the upright. And of course, it's Emma Curtis Hopkins, my favorite quote. I was going to say Mary Baker Eddy, but no, Emma Curtis Hopkins, these three named ladies. This too is good. This too is God. This too is for me, and I demand to see the blessing. That is something I say almost daily. I want to leave you with a final thought about what could possibly be some new habitudes, and they come from the Bible as well. This time, they are words written by the Apostle Paul in the letter to Philippians. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good rapport, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. In other words, look for the good and praise it. Focus on what is good, and you will attract. Law of attraction. That is what you will attract into your life. And so, my brethren and sistren, make these things your habitudes. Listen to these things, and you will move forward in the direction of fulfillment, in a life-giving manner, and you will come to know that what it is you already in here, what it is you already truly know. That God truly does mean it all for good. And so it is.